You've probably heard the joke that Amish families have a dozen kids and a casserole to match, and then the next question people whisper is always the same one. Okay, but do Amish people actually use contraception, or is it completely off limits? And I get why this topic pulls people in, because it's not really just about birth control. It's about who gets to decide what happens inside a marriage. It's about faith versus practicality. It's about what a community expects, what a couple can handle, and what gets said out loud versus what gets handled quietly. So today I'm going to answer it as plainly as I can, without the sensational stuff, and without pretending every Amish person lives the exact same way. My name is Sarah. I'm an ex-Amish girl from Pennsylvania, and I grew up around old order traditions, where a lot of life is guided by something called the Ordnung, basically the community's unwritten rulebook. And when it comes to contraception, the official answer and the real-life answer can be two different things. Let's start with the big truth right up front. Traditionally, Amish teaching is strongly against artificial birth control. In many Amish communities, the ideal is to accept children as a blessing from God and to avoid anything that looks like trying to control what God gives. That's not just a cultural preference, it's tied to how the Amish read the Bible and how they understand obedience and humility inside marriage. But here's where people get confused, because Amish isn't one single church with one single leader and one universal rule book. Amish life is organized by church districts, and districts can differ. The Ordnung is local. What gets tolerated in one community might get you in trouble in another. So when someone asks, do Amish people use contraception? The honest answer is, officially, most Amish communities discourage modern, artificial contraception. But in practice, some couples do use some form of family planning, especially quieter, less visible methods. Now let me explain what counts as contraception in Amish thinking, because that matters. In more traditional circles, the only completely safe answer socially is basically, we don't do birth control. Large families are normal, expected, and respected. You'll hear numbers like 6 to 9 children as common, and it's true that big families are widespread, even if the exact number varies by community and by the couple's situation. And yes, Amish population growth is fueled by high fertility and high retention. That part is real. But high fertility doesn't automatically mean zero family planning. It can also mean that family planning is limited, discouraged, less discussed, and sometimes practiced in ways that don't look like modern birth control. So what do Amish couples do if they're trying to space pregnancies, or if a pregnancy would be dangerous, or if a family is already stretched thin? One of the most talked about gray areas is natural family planning methods, like timing-based approaches. You'll sometimes hear the rhythm method mentioned. While tradition rejects birth control, some may use natural means like the rhythm method, and practices can vary. And that word vary is doing a lot of work, because it's the key. In some Amish settings, the idea is that if a couple is not using a device or a medication, they can frame it as, we're being careful, not we're preventing children. It's subtle, but socially subtle, is how a lot of sensitive topics work in Amish culture. Another thing that matters is that Amish culture tends to be private about sex and reproduction. So even when something is happening, it's not discussed publicly. You're not going to get an announcement, and you're not going to get open conversations in a women's sewing circle about what method someone uses. That's just not the culture. Now, what about condoms, the pill, IUDs, that kind of thing? In many Amish communities, condoms and hormonal birth control are viewed as artificial, and that's where the religious and cultural resistance gets stronger. There's also the issue of stigma. Even if a couple privately uses something, they usually won't want it known, because it can be seen as selfish, worldly, or lacking trust in God, depending on the community and how strict it is. At the same time, there's also evidence in Amish studies literature that some contraception may be used in secret in some groups, and that views vary by church. A narrative review on Amish health literature notes exactly that idea, that some women may use contraception in secret, and that abortion is universally forbidden in Amish settings. So no, it's not accurate to say Amish never use contraception, and it's also not accurate to say Amish are totally fine with modern birth control. The reality is in the middle, and it depends heavily on the district, the bishop, and the couple's circumstances. And I want to say something gently but clearly. A lot of Amish life is built around community harmony. If a practice threatens that harmony, people avoid talking about it publicly. That doesn't mean nothing ever happens. It means people handle things quietly. Now let's talk about the biggest misconception I see online. People will say Amish families are huge because they're forced to have as many kids as possible. That's not really the right way to put it. There is definitely strong cultural and religious pressure to welcome children, and in many places, using contraception openly would be frowned upon. But Amish couples are still human beings. They deal with exhaustion, health complications, financial stress, postpartum depression, and marriages that go through hard seasons, just like anyone else. The difference is, in Amish culture, you don't always have the language or the social permission to say, "We are at our limit." So what happens instead is that some couples accept every pregnancy as it comes. Some quietly space kids using timing. Some will breastfeed longer, which can naturally delay ovulation for some women, though it's not reliable as a strict method. And some, depending on how progressive or strict their community is, may use modern methods privately, especially if a doctor warns about health risks. That's honestly one of the best ways to understand it. The more a community is pressured by modern economics, medical realities, and changing expectations, the more some couples quietly move toward choice, even if the official ideal remains fate. Now, I want to address abortion because people often mix these topics together. In Amish teaching and culture, abortion is generally forbidden. That's a consistent point across Amish health literature summaries and community discussions. So when you're thinking about contraception in Amish life, remember, it's not a hookup culture conversation. It's almost always a marriage conversation, framed around morality, duty, and responsibility, even if people don't use those words out loud. Let me also talk about what permission looks like in Amish life, because outsiders sometimes imagine it as a list of strict laws like a government. The Ordnung isn't usually printed like a handbook and handed to you like an employee manual. It's community knowledge. You absorb it by living there. And it's reinforced by sermons, by family, and honestly, by the fear of standing out. If you're baptized Amish, you've agreed to that Ordnung. That means if a couple openly chose contraception in a community where it's condemned, it could become a church discipline issue if it became known and if leaders chose to confront it. But if it became known is a big if, because privacy is powerful. And again, a lot depends on leadership style and local norms. So here's the most realistic, grounded answer I can give you as someone who grew up around the mindset. Do Amish people use contraception? Many Amish communities teach against artificial birth control, and many couples do not use it, especially not openly. Natural family planning methods may be more quietly used by some couples. In some cases, modern contraception happens privately, particularly when health is involved, but it's often not discussed due to modesty norms and fear of community judgment. Now, if you're still listening, I want to make this personal for a second. Not dramatic, just real. When you grow up Amish, you're taught that a good life is a faithful life. You learn to value humility, obedience, and community. So the idea of intentionally preventing pregnancy can feel, to some people, like you're putting yourself above God's plan. That's the emotional and spiritual weight behind the rule. But the older I got, the more I saw that families are also doing math in their heads. Not just financial math, emotional math, health math, the math of how much a mother can handle, the math of what happens when there's a complicated birth. The math of what happens if a woman's body is breaking down after pregnancy. And that's why the conversation never has just one clean answer. Because even when a community says, this is wrong, real life still shows up at the kitchen table.